Gents, non-binary friends, welcome back to another episode of Growing Up Fundie. I am your host, Sydney Davis Jr., and today we are doing an episode on one of the great dramas of the Christian Bible, one of the great reality TV stories before reality TV. Think Sister Wives or Real Housewives of Lebanon or something like that. And it's a pretty interesting story, and it's pretty messed up, but you know, most of them are. So here we go. We are going to talk about the story of Sarah, Hagar, and Abraham. So let me give you a little bit of backstory on this. Abraham is said to be the father of two nations. Now we're going to talk about what nations those are exactly, but we're going to start from the beginning. So Abraham has a wife, Sarah. Sarah is a beautiful, gorgeous woman. She was apparently desired by an Egyptian pharaoh as well as the Philistine king at the time, but she was married to Abraham and she could not have kids. She was barren, and they tried and they tried and they tried to have children, and she could have no children. So one day, three strangers come to visit her, her and Abraham. So the strangers tell her that she will one day have a son, which is like a weird thing for strangers to say, but whatever. She laughs, obviously, because that is a weird thing for strangers you've just met to say. And one of the strangers calls her out, and he's like, "Why did you laugh just now when I was speaking?" And she denied laughing. She got a little freaked out, again, as you would if a stranger randomly told you you were going to have kids and then called you out for laughing, even though they don't know you. And it turns out that one of the mysterious strangers who was visiting her was actually God in the form of this stranger. And he was the one who told her that she would have a son and Abraham would, again, become the father of great nations. She didn't really understand. She thought at the time that this was going on that she was too old to have kids anyway, because she hadn't had any children at all their entire marriage up until that point, and she was getting up in age and was just no longer going to be able to have children. Now, when I read up in age, I thought like, oh, what was she, 40, 50? She was literally 80 years old when this is happening. She was between the ages of 70 and 90 when she's made this promise that she's going to have a child and Abraham is going to become the father of great nations. So no wonder she laughed, right? No wonder. But anyway, 10 years goes by and there are still no children. This promise was not fulfilled. And so Abraham and Sarah, they don't really know what to do. You know, Abraham obviously wants kids because back then spreading your name and your seed and your lineage was the whole reason that you got married and wanted to produce offspring. So Sarah did in my opinion, pretty fucked up thing that was totally legal back then. And she offered Abraham her slave girl, Hagar, to have kids with. So she's like, you can't have kids with me. Have kids with my young slave girl, Hagar. No evidence anywhere that Hagar was into this idea. All I know is that it happened. So Abraham gets with Hagar and she has a son. I read that this was actually a pretty common practice in ancient Mesopotamia, that some marriage contracts even considered a clause or made it a clause in their marriage that if your wife could not bear you a son, she basically owed you a slave girl to have a son with, because having sons was such a big deal. And Hagar was an Egyptian slave girl. So there you go. Some texts that I've read said that she offered her as a wife to him. Others that she was just offered as basically childbearing. But a lot of them do say that Hagar was offered as a second wife. So for Hagar, when she is married off to Abraham, this vastly improves her position within the household. So she's no longer this lowly slave girl who works for Sarah. She basically becomes Sarah's equal. And Sarah's like, what the heck? I've literally been with this man for 60 years and you think you're going to be on my level? What is that about? But Abraham really wanted a son, so he has a child with Hagar. Now, when Hagar becomes pregnant, Sarah actually gets really jealous, which doesn't really make a lot of sense. You know, Sarah, this was her idea to begin with, or so the text makes it seem. Wouldn't be surprised if this actually happened and we find out that he really pressured her to do it or he reminded her of that marital law. But from a strictly textual standpoint, it was Sarah's idea, but she immediately becomes jealous of Hagar. She immediately becomes jealous of the child that Hagar is carrying, and she starts to look down on Hagar. She starts to accuse her husband of basically banding together with Hagar to make Sarah miserable. She's like, I feel like you guys are basically parading yourself in front of my face. Abraham is like, you know what? She's your slave girl. You do what you want with her. If it bothers you so much, get rid of her as you see fit. He didn't stand up for Hagar. He wasn't like, hey, that's the mother of my child that you're talking about. He wasn't like, this was your idea. What are you talking about? He was just like, okay, fine. Do whatever you want with your slave girl. So Sarah starts to abuse her and be very cruel to her until Hagar runs away. Now, Sarah's name, I read in a few different places, means princess. And again, like, she was beautiful and desirable. Hagar's name, potentially, from what I've read, means wanderer, which is appropriate. So Hagar makes her way through the desert. She's literally kicked out, with nothing. Or, I mean, she ran away, but she didn't really have a choice. She has nothing. She has no food. She has no water. And she stops at a spring in the middle of nowhere, middle of the desert. And there, she meets an angel who tells her to go back. He tells her to go back to Abraham. And he says that her son, and this is a quote, shall be a wild ass of a man with his hand against everyone and everyone's hand against him. And he shall live at odds with his kin. What? In Hagar's response, she becomes the first person to name God, saying, "You are El Roi, El-Roi, which could mean either God of seeing or God who sees." So she basically says, like, I know who you are, you're God. So she goes back to this place where she was just treated so shitty that she was forced to run away, and she gives birth to her son, who is named Ishmael. However, God's promise to Sarah has not yet been fulfilled. Remember, he told Sarah, you will also give birth to a son, and a nation of people will come from that son. When Sarah is 90 years old, she gives birth to a son that she and Abraham name Isaac, which in a lot of text is claimed to mean laughter. So after Sarah gives birth to Isaac, now there's these two kids. There's Isaac and there's Ishmael. There's the wife, and then there's the second wife, or the slave girl, or the, however you want to call it, situationship happening. So after Sarah has basically given birth to Isaac, and he's around and he's existing, Abraham throws a feast for him. He throws this huge party, which it's like, did you throw a party for Ishmael? Like, I don't see that happening. No, you kicked him out into the wilderness, or at least you let your wife treat her so bad that she ran away and didn't care. What's not quite clear is the length of time between the birth of Ishmael and Isaac, because in a lot of places the story sounds like, you're told to go back to the encampment, you go back, you give birth to your son, then Sarah gets pregnant, she gives birth to her son. But it's actually supposedly a very long time, because what happens is at the party for Isaac, Sarah watches Ishmael, who is named in a lot of places as Isaac's teenage half-brother. So I don't know if they mean like 11, 12, 16, I'm not quite sure. But apparently Sarah sees this teenager playing with her son, and they're getting along really well and they're having a good time. And she is afraid that her son Isaac will actually be basically demoted for the quote-unquote throne of the family of Abraham's lineage if Ishmael sticks around and if Ishmael is in the way. She's afraid for her son's position, and she insists that Abraham banish Hagar and Ishmael. So, I mean, first of all, this poor slave girl is offered to this guy to be his new wife or his new mistress and forced to have a kid with him. The minute she gets pregnant, she gets abused and chased off and treated like garbage. Then she goes out into the wilderness, and some angel is like, actually turn around and go back. So then she does. And like, who knows how long later, maybe she's there for a decade, and who knows how she was treated during that decade. Her boss then gives birth to another son. So now they've got half-brother sons. And that first wife, the OG, Sarah, is like, actually, your son and my son get along way too well. You got to get the fuck out of here. It's just messed up. So one morning, Abraham hands Hagar some bread and water and sends them away. He sends his own teenage son away, and the woman that didn't even want to be the mother of his kid to begin with, as far as we know. Bread and water, cool. So they run out, obviously, very quickly. And Hagar has to hide Ishmael under a shrub because he's dying and she doesn't want him to bake in the heat. And she is weeping. He's so weak. She puts him under a shrub. She prays and she weeps on her hands and knees, thinking he's about to die. However, God hears Hagar weeping, and an angel is sent to speak to her, promising her that from Ishmael, her son, God will make him a great nation. Then out of nowhere, a well of water appears and they're saved. Ishmael, as prophesied, grows strong and he finds an Egyptian wife. In some versions of the text, Hagar is actually the one that finds him the Egyptian wife. In others, he finds her, which makes me wonder, I'm like, when she finds him a wife, does she find him a wife the same way that she was found as a wife? Like, I hope this was a consensual marriage, especially because Hagar is Egyptian as well. Anyway, he's got a good Egyptian wife, and he has 12 sons, all of whom become princes, which is dope as hell. I'm not really sure quite how that worked out. I'm not quite sure exactly what events unfolded, but all we know is that God kept his promise and her son became the descendant of Muhammad, the founder of Islam. So Muhammad is, a descendant of Ishmael's. Ishmael's this big guy. He gives birth to all these princes. Those princes then trickle down. Muhammad is the founder of Islam, comes from the lineage of Ishmael. So we don't really hear anything else about Sarah until she dies at the age of 127. So at that point, her child is 40, basically, I think. I'm not very good at math. So anyway, we don't really hear much about Sarah. We hear mostly about Hagar until she dies at 127 and Abraham buries her in a cave. Okay, great. So Hagar's son becomes the father, basically, of Islam. Whatever happened to Isaac? Ishmael's the father of Islam. What happened to Isaac? Well, Isaac would later go on to be the father of what would become both the foundation for Judaism and Christianity, which I find very interesting. Now, what I also find interesting is we never really hear anything about, does Abraham say sorry to Hagar? Does Hagar ever go back? Does she continue to live alone in the sand dunes or the desert? Does she move to Egypt? Is that where she finds her son, his Egyptian wife? There's so many questions that I have about this, but the main thing that I think is odd about this is it's always told as a story of kind of triumph. Hey, look, everybody overcame their obstacles. Yay. But honestly, this is a pretty messed up story. I'm just glad that I guess everything worked out in the end for Hagar, at least we think. So I ended up looking up, whatever happened to Hagar. And apparently, Hagar is supposed to be buried in Mecca in Saudi Arabia, the great mosque of Mecca. So things obviously worked out well for her, but it was a rough start getting there. And I would love to do a deep dive, and I think I will actually do a deep dive on Hagar herself, because I really want to know more about her. I got the majority of this information from the Bible, from a copy of Life magazine's Women of the Bible, from Google, from the Encyclopedia Britannica. But I definitely want to focus a lot more one day on Hagar herself and what we can find out about her. And if there's anything that you can find out about her, or there's anything interesting that you know, as always, please feel free to comment on whatever platform that you are listening to this on. You can hit me up via Instagram, Facebook, you can email me, you can contact me through my website, because I would love to know what you might know about this drama that definitely went down. Because the entire time I was reading this story, and even before when I knew about this story, it always it struck me very much as a Real Housewives type situation, if one of the housewives were a housewife against her will. But anyway, there you go. That is the biblical version of where Islam came from, of where Judaism came from, and where Christianity came from. Whatever you do, don't try to force your maid to marry your husband, because that's just wrong. Even if you think that your kid from that situation would become the next president of the United States, just don't do it. It's bad news. Okay, bye.